Good morning. Can everyone hear me? I'd like to start by thanking President Nair and Dean Conti today for inviting me here this splendid autumn morning. I'm a little overwhelmed to be the inaugural lecturer of this important series. It's not my first time here. The last time I was among the Gales, however, I was just starting college myself. I was pursuing a young lady who was then a freshman here at Iona College. All I'll say about that is that I hope my visit this time will be more successful than last time. When the dean asked me to speak, I took the opportunity to ask him his definition of a good speech. He told me it's very simple. You want a good beginning and a good ending. Most important, he said, you want to put those two very close together. This is very wise advice. The 10 Commandments fit on 2 stone tablets, and the Gettysburg Address was 271 words. I shall not equal them in eloquence, but I will match them in brevity. My topic today is moral and ethical leadership, but the venue is significant. We meet under the auspices of the Hagen Business School, at a college named for an island off Scotland in the Inner Hebrides. That island is only 1.5 miles long and 3 miles wide. There, Irish monks nurtured faith and learning at a time when the European continent was going through the Dark Ages. I don't think it is a stretch to say that one reason we enjoy the blessings of Western civilization today is because of the prayers and good work of centuries of these now forgotten monks. The Iona community ought to take encouragement from this legacy. Your college name is no accident. It is a testament to founders who thought big and understood the lasting impact that a little institution with large convictions can make on our world. This college is also a legacy of Blessed Edmund Rice and the order he founded to provide education for those who would otherwise never get one. Indeed, at the time Brother Rice set up his schools for Catholic children in Ireland, I believe such education was illegal. As I prepared for this speech, I wondered what Brother Rice would have made of the word ethics. I have a hunch old Brother Rice would prefer simple right and wrong, and I do too. I come to this topic as a newspaper man who majored in philosophy as an undergraduate. I'm sure some of the moms and dads here today will relate to my father. I think he looked at my decision to major in philosophy as a guarantee that I would end up living over his garage for the rest of my life. Happily for us both, I managed to find gainful employment. My talk has 3 parts. First, I'll talk about the field of ethics and why the increase in ethics courses doesn't seem to be doing the trick in terms of producing more ethical business leaders. Second, I'll spend a little time on the shortcomings of profession-based ethics. Finally, I'll come to my main proposition, which is that strong business ethics cannot be had without strong personal character. Let me start with perhaps the biggest problem with the teaching of ethics today. That's relativism. At so many other universities today, students do not emerge from the college ethics courses they take with a greater ability to distinguish between right and wrong, and then offer a rational explanation why. To the contrary, all too often, they come out believing that it's all subjective. Some of this, I believe, has to do with the popular misreading of science. As we come to know more about the human brain, growing numbers of people posit that free will is an illusion, and that what we think of as right and wrong are really just brain impulses over which we have little or no control. That is a crude oversimplification, of course, and it has more to do with the distortion of science than actual science, but it is real and it is palpable. Now couple this with the schools of philosophy that reject the idea of objective truth about man and nature. Once you do, you begin to appreciate why the most lethal thing you could do for a young man or young woman's sense of morality is to subject him or her to a college ethics course. These courses do not turn good people into bad people, but it often leaves otherwise good people confused and unsure of themselves, so that even when they do the right thing, they're not confident they can explain it in rational terms why their chosen course was right. This is not the place for a philosophical counterattack on the idea of relativism. I'm not a professional philosopher, but I will say this. I've never met a relativist who lives that way. A wronged relativist, for example, does not say, under my subjective code, stealing is bad, or my brain impulses tell me you should not have lied to me when you were selling me that car. To the contrary, he says, this guy robbed me, or that guy promised to redo our bathroom for $2,000, but he lied and ripped me off. These are appeals to others based on some implicit idea that there is a great wrong that has been done and that other people can recognize it. This is a healthy and natural instinct, but it is often undermined by de facto relativism when unformed minds are introduced to various and often contradictory schools of ethics and left to fend for themselves. This leads to my second point. I'm a little suspicious of business ethics. I'm also suspicious of values. It's not because I don't believe people in business should behave ethically. It's because I believe that ethics modified by adjectives, whether it be business ethics, medical ethics, lawyer ethics, journalistic ethics, have too often been reduced to a regulatory code separate from character. Ditto for values. When my wife and I teach our children, we don't teach values. We aim to instill virtues. I appreciate that each professional field has unique circumstances that lend themselves to unique ethical dilemmas. Let me give you an example from my own field. In the news business, we have practices that good journalists are expected to follow. Years ago, I took a course in such ethics, and it included some very wise and practical guidelines. For example, a reporter is supposed to get both sides of the story. The instructor reminded us that when you call someone for his side of the story at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, after your article is already written and just a few minutes before it's going into the paper, you're not really getting his side of the story. To be fair, you have to give people a reasonable time to answer, and yourself a reasonable time to incorporate what the person says. But so much of the course I took turned out not to be about right or wrong at all. It was really about the best ways to protect ourselves from being sued. That's good, and it's useful, and it will keep you away from some unethical behavior. But it has less to do with doing the right thing than how to steer clear of legal trouble. Ditto for the idea that business ethics is about paying for your profits by checking off some social boxes. For example, contributing to some charity or supporting some cause. These charities and these causes may well be worthy, but when character is removed from the equation, business ethics can become a cynical exercise in buying off bad behavior with contributions to some popular social cause, a latter-day form of buying indulgences. Let me give another example of what I mean by confused reasoning. Many years ago, when I was living in Asia, I was on a long train ride through Vietnam with an old college roommate who told me about an ethics course he had taken at his Fortune 500 company, which shall remain nameless. It began with a hypothetical. 30 people are stuck below sea in a submarine. You have 2 hours to bring them up and get them out. And the arithmetic says you don't have enough time to get everyone out. Those trapped had all sorts of stories. One was a man with 6 children who was about to discover the cure for AIDS, but he cheated on his wife. My friend told me that many of the women put him last. There was a handicapped elderly person. There were young children. There were men and women who were making tremendous contributions to humanity in medicine, in charitable work, and so forth. So the question is, what is the criteria to bring them up? It turned out that the answer the company wanted you to give was to bring them up by age, with those youngest who have the most time to live going first. I asked how that was any more objective a criteria than my proposal. My proposal was very simple. The strong defer to the weak. This, I take, is one of the bedrocks of civilization. The weakest and most vulnerable go first, and the strong use their strength to protect them. In this sense, I believe the wheelchair-bound grandma from Iona goes before the Stanford brain surgeon. It's a variation of the old women and children first. But I don't think you would get that from most ethics textbooks these days, and I find that alarming. My point is simply this. You cannot have business ethics without ethical businessmen. In the same way you can't have journalistic ethics without ethical journalists, or medical ethics without ethical doctors and nurses. The more we try to substitute regulation for character, the further we get from our goal. The flyer for this series speaks about how to navigate a complex world where ethics and values often conflict with business situations and decisions. That's true. But in fact, I believe complexity can often be an excuse. Dilemmas may well be complex and involve many factors and many people. But the principles that we need to apply are usually pretty straightforward. Honesty, integrity, and the willingness to do unto others as you would have done to yourself. For example, was it really all that complex what Bernie Madoff did to deceive his investors? Or when the dean of the Stanford Business School chose to have an affair with the professor who was not only a subordinate, but married to another Stanford School professor? Is it really that difficult to see what's wrong here? Are the issues of right and wrong really that obscure? Let's look at this from another direction. My nephew recently graduated from West Point. As an officer in the United States Army, at some point he will be responsible for the lives of men and women under his command. West Point takes this responsibility very seriously. What people do not appreciate is that West Point is not designed to produce the most brilliant generals. West Point is basically a pact between the American people and the United States Army. It says to this nation's moms and dads, you pay for the training of these officers. In exchange, when your son or daughter in uniform is in harm's way, we promise he or she will be led by men and women of character and ability. The honor code there reflects this. It's very simple. Quote, a cadet will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. That covers a lot of ground. And it's not just taught in an ethics course. It's meant to infuse the cadet's entire approach to his military career. So ask yourself this. If the Army believes that character is essential on the battlefield, can it be any less important in the boardroom? So what is the answer? Again, I think the answer is what it's been since at least Aristotle. Character. What's more, this is in fact how we live in reality. In the marketplace, we're often unsure of whom we are dealing with. So when we have to go to find someone we don't know, to buy a car, to hire a plumber, to find a babysitter for our children, what are the two things we want to know most apart from price? The first is whether the person is competent to do the job. But the second is equally important, whether we can trust them. Put it this way, if you're making a big purchase, what gives you more assurance? A multi-page guarantee in fine print? Or the comfort that comes from knowing you are dealing with a person you can trust? When I was at the White House, we used to have a saying, if it wouldn't look good on the front page of the Washington Post, probably that's a sign you shouldn't do it. That's not bad advice either, Because if you're doing something in the shadows, it's a pretty good sign it's not the right thing to do. But character is much larger than this. Let me end with the story about an engineer and a corporate leader who were faced with a huge ethical challenge of their own. The engineer's name was William de Messier. Forgive my French. I was Spanish, so sorry. The businessman was Walter Wriston, the chairman of Citicorp. In 1978, a year after Citicorp's brand new signature skyscraper opened in Manhattan, its engineer got a call from a student who asked him a question about how the building would hold up to pressure. The engineer went back to his calculations and realized he'd miscalculated. Under certain strong winds that had a probability of striking every 16 years, the building could be knocked down. This was before 9/11, when people weren't used to the idea of the building coming down. He investigated further, brought in other engineers, and consulted with the architect. They decided to go to Mr. Wriston with the bad news. Mr. Wriston, said the engineer, was fantastic. He asked only what needed to be done. They came up with a plan to quietly strengthen the building over a few months, floor by floor. And they did it too, at a cost of millions. They had many other choices. The engineer could have kept the information to himself, worried that exposing his mistake would ruin his professional career and invite lawsuits. When Mr. Wriston found out, he could have berated the engineer and threatened ruin and lawsuits to absolve himself of any liability. But they didn't. Instead, they did what needed to be done to fix the situation, and they spent what it took. In the end, they were rewarded for doing the right thing when people learned what they had chosen. But there was never any guarantee it would come out that way. I'd say the difference was simple. These were men of character. My friends, most of you will never find yourself in such a position. Most of you won't even have to make those gut-wrenching decisions, such as closing down a factory that is essential to a town's economy, or taking responsibility for an industrial accident and the damage it has inflicted. But what you do in your business life will affect many around you. And when the hard decisions come, for example, firing a person who just isn't up to the job, those whose lives are most affected by your decisions are not going to ask how many business ethics courses you took. They will want to know whether you are an honest person who treats others fairly and does not hide behind evasions. If you are a person of character, they may still disagree with your decisions, but it's more likely they will respect you as someone who asked the right questions and stepped up to his or her responsibilities. Even more important, you will respect yourself. Not everyone asks these questions, but we are discussing right and wrong at Iona today because this is an institution that expects its sons and daughters to be leaders and not followers. As Pope Francis reminds us, business is a noble vocation. For a healthy, thriving business not only makes profits for its owners, it gives men and women the opportunity to provide for their families and achieve their dreams as they produce the goods and services that society wants. So as you sons and daughters of Iona make your way in the world of business, I ask you this. Be proud of your school. Regard your work life as a calling, not just a job. Treat everyone you deal with the way you would like to be treated yourself. And when it comes to complex ethical challenges, know that the right thing to do will become more clear if you remember that those on the receiving end of your decisions are human beings whose dignity comes from being fashioned in the image and likeness of our Creator. Thank you for having me. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Okay.
If you have a question, raise your hand and someone will walk over to you. I have one here.
Mr. McGurn, I'm Leroy Peters, MBA student. My question surrounds the fact that success in today's business world is measured by wealth accumulation. So would it be fair to say until wealth accumulation is no longer the hallmark of success, that the conflict between ethics and values and business-making decisions will be ongoing?
So is the question, as I understand it, that we're too focused on accumulating wealth? Okay. Well, I think that's always been a perennial challenge in the business world. But at the same time, I'm not sure it's unique to business. I think law firms, universities are some of the most wealthy segments of our societies, rivaling multinational corporations in many cases. Not Iona up there, but the other ones. So I don't think it's unique to business. I think it gets back to gets back to the Ten Commandments and the constant injunctions of almost all religions not to make material things the center of our lives. And I would say this: when businesses get in trouble, they all say this is so complicated. It's not complicated when they generally go to jail. If you lie to someone, and I worked before the Journal. I put 2 years in at the New York Post recently, and in New York, so many of our politicians are let out in handcuffs. It's embarrassing, but it's not really that hard to figure out. They took money they shouldn't have taken. They cut corners they shouldn't have cut, and they lied to people. So I don't see that is unique to business. It's a challenge, but I think that's a challenge of being a human being in a professional world. There are a lot of people that are business. I lived in Hong Kong for 10 years. I remember China when it was poor. And I'll tell you, a lot of people in Hong Kong who were very wealthy and contributed a lot to China were far less materialistic than the people who weren't wealthy. And that's frequently too, because if you don't have anything, you're focused, I need a TV, I need this. And sometimes people who are very wealthy are less focused on anything because they have no real needs. Anyone else?
It's right here.
Sean? Yeah.
Might be kind of a silly question,
Sean, right here.
but I'm just kind of curious. Are there any rankings in terms of where U.S. stands in terms of countries?
There are rankings. They're generally the rankings are corruption rankings, and if you compare, this is more an aspect of my belief. So there are societies where to get anything done you have to bribe people and so forth. And I think it's called Transparency International that presents a list of those countries. And what you find is that the countries that have more closed markets are more corrupt. And the reason is you have to pay to get what you want. For example, years ago, when I was living in Hong Kong, Milton Friedman came, and he delivered a lecture. It was right after he had come through China. I don't know if any of you had any dealings with businesses in China, but you frequently will get a business card, and it would say, Mr. Chu, Deputy Assistant Foreign Minister, right? And then it would be like an accordion, and it would say Chu Waterworks, Chu Trading Company, Chu Steel. This is so common. I mean, just imagine John Kerry, and then having, Kerry Steel, all that. That's what it's like in China. And he held it up and he said, this is a prescription for corruption. And in Hong Kong, where it's very free, for example, if you want to buy a machine in Germany, you can get German currency and buy it. You don't need any permission. In China, you need to get permission to buy that foreign currency because they don't have a real currency. That's an occasion for corruption. His point was every time you have to go to the government for permission to do something, it's opportunity for these people to make you corrupt. And so if you look at Transparency International and compare it with one of the groups ranking the markets, generally you will see the more open the market, the less corruption. If only because you don't need to bribe people to do ordinary things. It doesn't eliminate corruption, because people are still sinful and make mistakes, but it eliminates corruption to do simple things, like open up a factory or something. Why don't the dean choose?
Thank you, Bill. How do we impart character then to our children, our students, our employees?
Well, that's the that's the perennial question since Socrates and so forth. Can virtue be taught? Look, it starts in the home, and but I think you can reinforce it. As I say, I use West Point only because I'm familiar with West Point. And I notice there are student codes now around, they're just getting longer and longer. And it just, it makes me more suspicious. I'd rather have someone concentrate on being a good person. And what they do is their emphasis on being truthful and honest, not lie, cheat, or steal, and don't tolerate people. That's hard to do, especially the tolerate part. It's one thing to say, I'm gonna walk the straight line, but I'm gonna turn my eyes to other people. You're obligated, if you violate the honor code, to report yourself, and if you don't, your colleagues are required to do it. That's a hard thing to do. So I think it's an old question, but it really is. Does it really help to tell people about this, that there really is no right and wrong? It's what you say is, we say that in one sense, and then in the next sense you're before a jury, and they're saying, well, there is a right or wrong. And I think the larger question is, in some, not here, but in some business ethics courses at graduate schools, I know the debate is, if I give this bribe, is it a violation of X code? I mean, yes, you can get away with doing something that's legal, but is it right? What you want to do is get people to ask, is it the right thing to do? And I think the answer to that is pretty much the golden rule. I don't think it's that, seriously, if you would accept it as fair if it were done to you, that's probably a pretty good sign. I don't think that I don't think they're that complicated. I think it's a matter of, do you ask that question of yourself? And I think it comes up as a colleague. We all work in offices. We all know who's the honest person in the office, who's the person that gives a little more if you ask them for help. I personally, don't claim that I'm better than anyone else, but what I aim for is a reputation where I'm honest, so that if a difficult situation comes up, where I'm telling the truth but it doesn't look good for me, I want people to believe me. Like the boy who cried wolf and so forth. So I think that the way to teach it is to emphasize there is a right and wrong and have consequences for it, and for individuals to constantly be asking themselves, is not just, can I do this thing without violating any codes? Because that's my problem with codes. It becomes a legal thing. I check this box, check the other box, but you really still did the wrong thing, even after all this. Can you ask yourself, is this the way I would like to be treated? And I think 90% of the problems go away if you can answer that in the affirmative.
Hi, I'm Frederica Rudell from the Marketing and International Business Department. I'm also very interested in sustainability. You mentioned the golden rule, and sustainability really is the intergenerational golden rule. It occurs to me that one of the other issues, especially in the business world, is long-term versus short-term thinking. What's right now in the short term, and I guess Walmart is being punished for saying that they're going to spend more on their employees and make sure that they're well paid, versus the long term, and sustainability issues come into play. Should we pollute now, or should we make sure that our procedures and processes and products are sustainable?
Yeah, I mean, again, you're getting into very, that's kind of what I would call a regulatory approach. You get into a lot of specifics, and we're trying to think, what is the answer to this particular problem? And I would say those are all legitimate concerns. But again, I think a lot of them are solved if you ask yourself, is this something I would like to be done to my town? A lake polluted or something. And I don't have the answers for that. I'm just suggesting that the questions are often not, there's technical answers to the questions, but have this process versus that process. We can't anticipate the circumstances of every question. I think we can anticipate what kind of criteria you use. And my criteria is pretty, I think just that you have to be honest and ask the question. But you can't give a technical answer in advance. I don't know, there's so many contingents in all of those things. I don't know which would be the most sustainable. I don't know what the course is. What I would ask is, if it's something that's going to do harm, would I like some business coming in here in my town and doing that? Again, I think a lot of the questions take care of themselves if the dilemmas go away if you ask that kind of question.
You have to be thinking
Yeah, I think he,
Just as Riston
Yeah,
did, he
yeah.
thought in the long term.
I don't think it was wrong term, I think he thought right and wrong. I have a building that's dangerous for people. The engineers tell me this is dangerous, I have to fix that. I don't think it was more complicated for Walter Riston than that. I have to fix it. And the story says he got out his yellow pad and they came up, the engineers not only came to him with the problem, they had also been thinking of how you would do the answer. You know, maybe it's not always as clean as that. But I don't think he was thinking, well, in the short term this, I think he was thinking, this is a bad thing and I have to fix it. And he did. And he spent what it took, you know, and it was courageous. And they had a few breaks. There was a newspaper strike right at the time, so it didn't. Reporters that might want to, that were kind of smelling something suspicious going on, didn't get a chance to write about it.
You're in a position to have observed and studied history and its impact to your daily life and your professional career. Go back and look at the rhetoric. Lincoln ran for president. Rhetoric today, projecting in the future. What's your opinion on where we're headed with respect to the political climate, which does arguably set the stage for how we behave as a country?
Yeah, I'm not as worried about that as other people because, I mean, in some sense, Lincoln's world was my world, is like benefits people like me, speechwriters, because he would give his speech, only people like, a number of people like this would actually hear it. It didn't matter if he had a high, whiny voice. I don't know what his voice was like, you know. Maybe he had a terrible voice or something, or how awkward he was. And then I think he had several copies written out that he would distribute, and it would be printed in newspapers the way all important things should be, like that. Unfortunately today, you have Twitter and you have that. Those are just realities. And I'm not against the messiness. I think messiness is you know, real debates are not often handled in the least passionate way and so forth. And that's true whether it's inside the church, whether it's inside politics or inside your community. I mean, I've been in town halls where the issue at stake is like a stoplight on a corner or a sewer down there. And one thing I learned, when people say there's a boring story, there's no such thing as a boring story. There's going to be someone that hates that traffic light, someone that wants it, and there's going to be a clash. And it's a human drama. So I'm not so worried, Missy. And I think at the end of the day, you do have to have faith in the people having good judgment. Our politics is built on the idea that ordinary people know their interests better than other people. And at the end of the day, they'll kind of figure out the hucksters from the you know, from the genuine people. It doesn't mean to say they won't pick the wrong person. You know, they can still pick the right person, but our system allows us to fix that by removing people. So I'm not as alarmed. I mean, there's a lot of things that I would like to see different, but I'm not as alarmed at that. You know, definitely there's been a lowering of the level of debate and discourse, but I'm not sure if we had the same technologies available when the Founding Fathers were debating in Philadelphia. And, you know, if Franklin could tweet something out that he didn't like about Adams or something, you know, I'm not sure it would be comments about someone's bad breath or showing up drunk or hair pieces or something. So I just think it's a reality that we have to live with. And sooner or later, you know, there's a new technology. It upsets everything, but people do adjust and so forth. And I think we just have faith. Now, I will say the other part of the founders were they believed virtue was important to being a good citizen and a wise citizen and making choices. And I think sometimes we should change that. The idea that it's just sort of mechanical, the best of all possible worlds will emerge. And I don't believe that. I think we need to take virtue seriously. And I think this school wouldn't exist if it didn't take virtue. I mean, I just pass the symbols. Think of them. The Celtic cross you have, the statue of St. Columba, and all. This is a testament to the idea that virtue and character matter. And they're not just side things, side parts of our personality. They're the heart of who we are.
Hello, Tariq Israel, undergraduate and marketing major. I just want to know, since you have so much experience, have you ever found that practicing ethics in terms of business left the business seeming less competitive or dominant in terms of the industry he was in?
I'm a writer, so, and you know, newspaper man, and I was drafted to be a speechwriter for a while, so that part didn't come up. I found that I think probably what everyone here finds, the hard things are being honest when there's a lot of pressure not to, and seldom is the pressure to lie. I mean, no one, I think that's sort of on TV. But the reality is, you know, everyone wants to go this way, and you have to say something the other way. And I think that's just, it's never easy. I think it does get easier if you're used to doing it, because if you do it once, and I found saying little things. I found, for example, like in rejecting an article or something, if I tried a euphemism and say this article's too long, someone would send it back in shorter form. And I've just found honesty is a better approach. It sometimes makes people mad at you, but if you tell them the real reason, and so forth, you don't prolong the situation, and so forth. Also, if you tell the truth, you don't have to you don't have to remember your lie, and all, that's how people get caught up. My dad was an FBI agent. That's why they say one lie leads to another, because you have to remember. It's so complicated. If you've just told the truth, it's a lot less complicated. So I haven't myself found the dilemma about making less money or something for the company, because I haven't been in that. I don't think I've been in that position. And most of the enterprises that I was with on the side lost a ton of money. So if losing money is a sign of high ethics, I'm a block of moral granite.
Matt Carey, Director of Financial Market Studies here. Just this morning there was a story in the paper about Goldman Sachs firing 22 trainees, analysts, for cheating on some test that apparently wasn't all that difficult. But these are kids from the best schools, very intelligent by all accounts, have made it through the whole process to Goldman Sachs. What are we not getting across to them in school about ethical behavior, and what can we do to reinforce that so things like this don't?
Yeah, I think certainly some of the big schools have a problem with that, but I would say it's not just the school's failure. I was reading this last night, and I was watching, I confess, some trashy TV thing about the family out in Texas whose kid killed 4 people, and the affluenza thing and so forth. That was a family failure. You know, I mean, maybe the schools failed and maybe the legal system failed, but I mean, it comes first in the family. And sometimes some kids won't get that, and I just think you just have to reinforce it. I will say, I do believe some schools, especially the bigger schools where the payoffs are really large, there is an attitude of I'm entitled. Sometimes there's an attitude, I work really hard for this, so I'm entitled to blow off steam and do things other people can't. I just don't think you can tolerate that, and sometimes we do tolerate that. And look, a lot of places tolerate superstars who get, and they don't want to ask too many questions about what they're doing. But again, I don't think it's just business. I think it's true in all fields, whether it's medicine, whether it's journalism. So I think this is a human temptation. And I think because money's, let me just say this, I've not found that money is the greatest evil. I've found pride and ideology far more corrupting of people often than mere money, and at a much, much higher level. So I think the schools have to create an environment, again, where so you have to be a good person. I don't mean a goody-goody or something, but someone that takes these questions seriously, and the institution has to show we do it. You know, I mean, I'm a graduate of Notre Dame. They have a football program, and they've disciplined kids for doing stuff, and that's a tough decision because they're making a lot of money off this football program, right? I like it when they discipline someone because it's a signal. Not everything goes, and a lot of places don't do that. So I think we have to remember that discipline comes from to teach. Right? It's really your parents discipline you, and it's about love. It's not about because they want to punish you. And I know a lot about discipline. I grew up. My dad was a Marine. I grew up on our refrigerator. We had a saying. We had the eagle anchor and globe in the Marine Corps. It said, "To err is human, to forgive divine, neither is Marine Corps policy. So I learned a lot about this. But the last question I'd say is, I think a school like Iona, the unique thing that you bring to it, in addition to taking this seriously, that when it's done right, and when you ask these questions right, it's done in an atmosphere of love. And all love is tough love. All love is helping people and so forth. And I think that when I say, remember that your decisions affect people who are, you know, fashioned in the image and likeness of our Creator, if you just think of that, that's going to change a lot of behavior. And I think when people come to a place like this, that is a community where they take this seriously, they're more open to the correction and the instruction, you know, as opposed to just, that's, again, it's just, I'm trying to draw a contrast between what I think is sort of emphasizing virtues and character over emphasizing a list of things that you just check off and then you go to sleep and don't worry about it. One is the minimum box check, the other is, you know, can you look yourself in the mirror and are you treating people the way they should? And I don't think a Catholic school should be embarrassed of saying it's a loving environment, you know, where they care not just what grade you get, but who you are as a person and what's going on in your life. And the best managers I found sort of know that. It doesn't mean that they become guidance counselors, but they, you know, if their employees going through a rough time, they know about it, help them through it.
We have time for one more question. One down in the third row.
Thank you for your time. This is Ahmed, MS finance student. Do you think it's a good idea to have ethical rating agency like credit rating agency, even though that we know there is a problem with these agencies, like from where they get paid, but at least we have something agency that make ethical rating agencies for companies.
Which agent? I was a little confused.
Do you think like it's a good idea to have ethical rating agencies like credit rating agencies, like Standard Moody's and
Credit rating.
Yeah, yes. I think all those things have a legitimate role, but a minimal role. Because look at Moody's, they gave these recommendations that were wrong. You know, whether or not it was deliberately misleading, it was wrong. And I think we deceive ourselves if we just rely on that. The temptation with that is you get the certification, and then your obligation is discharged. And I just don't think that's why they all have a purpose. As I said, I'm for codes. There are things unique to every profession, whether it's medicine, journalism, law, or business. But it's not enough. It's just not enough. And the tendency is when we get a code to check the boxes and not do the right thing. There's so many cases where no one's done anything legally wrong, right? If that's going to be the bar too, legal liability, that's a pretty low bar. And I hear that a lot in politics today. Oh, it wasn't criminal. Is that really, is that the question that John Adams would have asked, or Henry Clay, or Abraham Lincoln, or FDR, that it's okay because it was legal, or it was not illegal? I think the challenge is to raise the bar and demand us to be a good person. And again, I'll leave you this. My example that I think for ethics is, the hardest thing to buy frequently is a used car, right? Because the market can calculate a price based on the year and stuff and miles, but it still doesn't tell you the unique circumstances of the car. And so it's a pig in a poke, and then a lot of economists spend a lot of time trying to figure out a more accurate model for pricing. So when you're buying a used car, it's probably a big purchase, and you probably can't afford a new car. It's a big purchase. And again, what would you rather have? Get some, multi-page sheet. When I get a multi-page guarantee like this, I know the fine print is saying your case won't qualify. Right? What you want is to go to the guy that people say he's an honest guy. He's not gonna, he's not gonna rip you off. That's basically what people want in this world, and that comes from just being a person who tells the truth. Tells them this car was in an accident, or this car, it'll probably do okay for 3 years, but it's not going to last. Whatever it is, that's what I think we want. And if we could transpose that into the larger decisions, I think a lot of so-called dilemmas go away. To me, it's more about asking the right questions. And in any given business situation, I'm not sure there's always one answer. You know, I think there are several answers that could be right, but again, I'd have a lot more confidence if I thought the person was a good person or an honest person, that he took into account the consequences of his actions. Dean, can I have, this young lady's had her hand up for a long time, so I'll just take one more if it's not a problem.
Thank you very much, first of all. So I'm an undergraduate business student, and I'm hoping to go into accounting and finance. So as you mentioned, that the right thing to do is not always the most popular thing. So what advice would you offer to those who struggle with the backlash or are afraid of the backlash that may come with speaking up for what is right in the workplace or just in your career?
You know what, I think the answer is do the little things, okay? As I say, most of us are not going to have the decision, do we close this factory down and offshore jobs? And remember, when you offshore jobs, say from Cleveland, you might be giving 100 people in the Philippines a job that's life or death for them. So it's complicated. It's not always an easy decision in terms of doing good. Again, I'd say being a good person, it's the little things. Are you a good colleague? Are you honest? Do you help people? If you do the little things, I mean, St. Columba, I'm sure, taught this, that, you know, habit forming virtue. If you do the little things and you stand up on the little things, it's a lot easier to stand up for the big things. I mentioned the West Point Code. That's what's drilled into them. They're drilled into doing the little things. It's important not to cheat in a class, because guess what? When you're on the battlefield, your cheating is gonna kill people, get people killed. If you can't stand up and say what you think in that class, are you going to stand up and say this is the wrong thing to do? Maybe not moral thing, but it's going to get a lot of people killed. They take it very seriously, and I think there's no, you can't be good in big things if you're not prepared in little things. And I would say we all face little challenges every day, and how, you know, for me it's being a good dad, being there for my kids, am I faithful to my wife? We all face these little things, and the more we handle those, the better fitted we are when the big challenge comes across. Not easy, you know, it's sort of like raising children. The answer is very easy, the doing it is very hard and a long, long process, and you often don't know until the end how it's going to come out. So, anyway, thank you for coming out.